Okay, so the paper I'm presenting today is How Well Can George Manage His Money? So I'll start today by introducing the Financial Competence Assessment Inventory and giving you a brief summary of some of our research, so reliability, validity studies, etc. And I'll finish with a case study, George, to demonstrate an FCI profile of financial abilities for a person with a mild intellectual disability. I completed my first financial competence assessment as a psychologist about 12 or 13 years ago, and at that stage there was no universally accepted definition of the construct financial competence. There were no specific measures of financial competence available. Psychologists were using tests that are not specifically designed to assess financial competence, such as IQ tests and tests of cognitive ability, to examine financial abilities. Another problem then was that although the decision as to whether someone is competent is a legal decision, the decision often involves input by third parties, such as carers or family members. However, research had shown that third-party reports may not be reliable. So the FCI was developed to provide a reliable and valid evaluation of financial competence. It's a standard measure and it's used to determine strengths and weaknesses in financial abilities. It does not advocate the use of cut-off scores. It was developed for use with younger and older adults with or without cognitive impairment. And the FCI database includes data from people on a small pension to people with extensive financial portfolios. Two forms of the FCI were developed. Form A is used with the person requiring assessment, and Form B is used with a third-party respondent, so someone that knows the person well. FCI scores can be summarised to describe financial competence in two different ways. 6 subscales designed to assess everyday financial abilities, financial judgment, estate management, cognitive functioning, debt management, and support resources. And there are 4 scales designed to assess the main processes involved in financial competence. So that is understanding, appreciation, reasoning, and expressing a choice. And these 4 processes were identified in '88 by Applebaum and Grissow as important criteria in determining competence. And they're used in a variety of forms, in part or whole, to determine competence. So to examine the reliability and validity of the FCI, we administered a battery of tests to 178 people. That was 119 people with various types of cognitive impairment, such as acquired brain injury, dementia, schizophrenia, and intellectual disability. And we had 59 people without cognitive impairment who served as a comparison group. The measures we used were the Financial Competence Assessment Inventory, the Money Management Subscale of the Independent Living Scales, the Financial Decision-Making Subscale of the Hopemont Capacity Assessment Inventory, Waste Vocabulary Subtests as a measure of intelligence, and the Mini-Mental State as a measure of current cognitive ability. So first we examined the reliability of the FCI, and it was found that overall it showed very good reliability. It had a Cronbach's alpha, so internal consistency. It was a Cronbach's alpha of 0.96, and that was for 38 items. It had excellent inter-rater reliability, so the agreement between 25 pairs ranged from 83% to 98%. And it had good test-retest reliability. So the correlation between first and second administrations over an average of 7 weeks was 0.93. So to establish construct validity, we compared scores on the FCI with the scores on similar measures for the various groups. Now we expected that if the FCI was a valid measure, its score should correlate positively with scores on similar measures, but not necessarily with the WACE or the MMSE scores. Now these two measures that we used there, the Money Management Subscale and the Financial Decision-Making Subscale, they measure some aspect of financial competence, but they're not comprehensive measures. We found that for all groups, FCI scores were positively and significantly related to the other financial measures. And you can see there that the total sample correlation between the FCI and the money management subscale was 0.89, and for the financial decision-making subscale, the correlation was 0.85. So this suggested that the FCI was measuring some of the same abilities as the other financial measures, and this shows evidence of being a valid measure of financial competence. Next, we wanted to know how valid WACE scores were in relation to financial competence. When we examined the relationship between FCI and WACE scores for the various groups, we found that arithmetic was positively and significantly related for all groups. However, for the comparison group and the group with acquired brain injury, these correlations are quite low. Digit span and letter number sequencing were not good measures for assessing financial competence or indicating financial competence for the majority of groups. So taken together, these findings suggest that measures of intelligence, like the WACE scores, are not good at predicting financial competence in people with different types of cognitive impairment or for people without cognitive impairment. So next we examined the relationship between FII scores and the mini-mental state for each of the groups. We found that for all groups with cognitive impairment, there were some positive significant relationships between scores on the FCI and scores on the mini-mental state. For the comparison group, only support resources were significantly rated to MMSE scores. For the group with acquired brain injury, the mini-mental state is not significantly related to estate management, debt management, or support resources. And you can see that the correlations are generally lower for the group with acquired brain injury than for the other groups with cognitive impairment. Our overall conclusion was that although the mini-mental state appears to be measuring some of the same underlying abilities as the FCI in some people with cognitive impairment, the MMSE is not a good indicator of financial ability for people without cognitive impairment or for people with acquired brain injury. Okay, next we compared scores on the FCI for a group of people with cognitive impairment who each had a legally appointed administrator with a group of people who didn't have administrators. So these were people that managed their own finances. We found that FCI scores were able to distinguish between those two groups, and you can see that the group of people with administrators performed significantly poorer on the FCI than the group of people without administrators. In addition, we found that FCI scores could distinguish between groups with different types of cognitive impairment. That is, people with dementia or intellectual disability performed significantly poorer than people with ABI or schizophrenia. And because third-party respondents frequently provide evidence when a person's competence is in question, we compared scores on the FCI between 56 people with a cognitive impairment and their respective caregivers. So these were third-party respondents who knew the person well. We found significant positive relationships between scores for the group with cognitive impairment and their carers on 4 of the FCI subscales. So that was the everyday financial abilities, financial judgment, estate management, and cognitive functioning. However, there was no significant relationship for debt management or for support resources, suggesting a lack of agreement between actual performance and third-party reports on these 2 subscales. It appeared that carers had difficulty determining the debt management practices of the person whose abilities they were estimating. They also had difficulty with knowing whether the person would know where to seek help with managing their finances. When we examined the processing subscales, the relationship between actual performance and third-party reports on the processing subscales, we found positive significant relationships for all 4 subscales. But you can see there that appreciation and expressing a choice are only moderately correlated. So it suggests that there's some disagreement there. we concluded that due to the discrepancies found between actual financial ability and third-party reports, wherever possible, the determination of competence should involve an assessment of the person whose competence is in question. Okay, so can George manage his money? Now, George is one of those people who falls into the grey area of competence. He's neither clearly competent nor clearly incompetent. And this is where the FCI is particularly useful. So George is 39 years old, he lives independently, he drives a car and is currently undertaking a computer course. He has a mini mental state score of 29. He's been diagnosed with an intellectual disability. Until 18 months ago, George's finances were managed by his mother, but at that stage she decided she could no longer continue in that role. At that stage, a legal hearing was heard to determine whether George could manage his own financial affairs. At that stage, we administered the FCI, and this was what we found. So this is a profile of George's financial abilities. You can see there that he has strengths in debt management and support resources. So debt management, for example, he hasn't received default notices. Support resources, he knows where to look for assistance in managing his money. He has an average score for everyday financial abilities and for cognitive functioning. So everyday financial abilities would include things like recognising the importance of paying essential bills on time, like utility bills. Cognitive functioning, he has functional reading ability and is able to carry out basic arithmetic. Okay. But you can also see on that figure there that he has a low score for financial judgment and for estate management. Now, financial judgment includes, for example, making investment decisions. Estate management would include, for example, knowing about banking protocols. Okay. You can see on that figure there that it also shows George's composite score, which is 85. But this provides us little useful information. We need the profile showing the 6 subscales. So at the VCAT hearing, the tribunal decided that George would be given an administrator to manage his finances, but he would manage some part of them. So, for example, he might pay his own utility bills. And this has worked well for George over the last 12 or 18 months. Recently, he applied to VCAT. He felt he could now manage his own financial affairs. And a recent assessment using the FCI showed that George had shown some improvement in his financial abilities. His financial judgment had improved slightly, as had his ability to understand financial matters. And this is possibly due to the fact that he's been managing hands-on some of his money for the last 12 months or so. So at the latest hearing, he was granted the right to manage his own financial affairs. I'll just include there George's processing abilities. So you can see there he's got an average score for appreciation, reasoning and expressing a choice. He has a low score for understanding. And for an example of understanding how credit operates. Okay. But at the latest hearing, George was granted the right to manage his own financial affairs. Okay. The FCI has been used by other researchers. For example, using the FCI with older adults, Verncombe et al. In 2011 found, amongst other things, that FCI scores are associated with cognitive and mood variables. For example, poorer debt management was associated with depression. The FCI was reviewed for the Public Garden and Trustee of British Columbia by O'Connor in 2009, and you can see the report there from Connor. The FCI is currently being used in several countries around the world. It's used in Belgium, Canada, Italy, and the Netherlands, and it's currently being translated and validated into Italian by a group in Rome and into French by a group in Belgium. So in summary, the FCI was found to be a reliable and valid measure of financial competence for people with and people without cognitive impairment. It's able to distinguish between people who are financially competent and those who are not. It can be used to identify strengths and weaknesses in financial abilities across different dimensions of financial competence. And it can also provide information from a third-party perspective. In line with our original aim in developing the FCI is a standard tool that can be used to determine the least restrictive alternative when financial competence is in question. I'd like to finish by just acknowledging the organisations who funded the original FCI research, and the FCI was originally developed as a research instrument as part of my PhD. Okay, thank you.